Dionne Warwick got on an airplane, taken to the airport by her father, arrived in London to learn that her father had died, went right back to New York City to confront that issue of the death of her father's stunt, and the next morning she wakes up to confront her mother. This is Dionne Warwick encountering a stroke.
I woke up about 5:30 in the morning and aching from the position I was in. I went into the bathroom, I took my shower and got myself together and put on a pair of jeans and a big top, and it kind of dawned on me that what was going on. My daddy was dead and I had to now get my act together and see what we were supposed to do. I walked into my mother's room and she was laying, looking up at me as I walked in. And you know, there's a certain amount of distortion to people's faces when you wake up anyway. So that's what I thought it was, and I said, "Good morning." And she kind of uttered. She never spoke. It was like, and I said, "I'll get a cold towel." And I went in and I got a cold, and I wiped her face. I said, "How you doing this morning?" You know, I was trying to just keep the real thing away. And when she couldn't talk, I panicked. And then I realized that the distortion was there. Her face had just twisted, and she couldn't talk, and the look in her eyes was pleading. Why can't I say something to you? What is going?
Absolutely, and scares us as the stroke patient and scares us as the loved family member.
What can we do if we're one of the family members? What can we do if someone has suffered the stroke? What's the immediate response?
Well, we can do a lot, and Dionne Warwick puts her finger on something that she tried to put the real stuff away. She speaks, therefore, to her own denial. Let us not deny. When someone has a stroke, or seemingly a stroke, let's get the information for ourselves. And many people recommend, the family members of a stroke patient say, get that information to the patient. Tim, this is very, very important. You can wring your hands and run immediately for support groups, which is very, very important, obviously, the support groups. But you've got to get the information. You must pass it on. And you can't sit there wringing your hands and worrying just about the emotional reaction as this person before you appears to be going crazy and believes, I am going crazy. I can't. The aphasia, I can't speak. You have to start to teach them to ways to compensate for the loss that they may be experiencing. For example, I just talked to a woman this morning, and she said that when her father had a stroke, he could no longer dress himself. But rather than wringing their hands and wondering and worrying, her brother realized that if he could teach his father to dress himself with his eyes closed, he could dress himself. It was a task that suddenly, if he didn't see, it did better. These kind of things. And another aspect of it is, don't mislead a stroke patient.
Don't
You're
just
going to
say
be
it's
fine.
going to be
You're going to be fine. Well, they're lying there.
Don't worry about it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They know
Wrong
full
approach.
well that they're not fine and that
Right.
something's really very problematic here and has to be dealt with.
Right.
Let's go back maybe to Dionne Warwick on this one too, Tim, because what she did is she really galvanized the family to support this mother of hers, to make sure that they all worked for the mother, but she sought information. She went all over the United States looking for the best therapy, and that's good advice for all of us. Not wringing our hands, but getting the families and ourselves and the patient to work in their own behalf. Again, here's Dionne Warwick.
And she was alone, and I'm sure all kinds of things went through her head. What am I going to do now? He's not there anymore. Because they were a loving couple. They were the kind of marriage that I would eventually like to evolve to. But we wouldn't allow her to get morbid. I mean, I insisted, hey, we need you. Come on, get your act together here. Come on, you could go back on the road with me. I mean, we gave her all things to live for. My children played a big part in it. They need you. We need you. You need you. Come on and get it together. And we found a hospital in Vegas where I moved her for a year. She lived in Las Vegas for a year, and she took daily therapy. And she is totally recovered.
Helpful. She made doctors tell her everything. Don't hold back anything, and just don't read those little charts and tests. I want to know. She did something else too, Tim, which I think is very important advice. She got the nurses to help her. Nurses with their hands-on care may be more valuable very often than the doctors. Yes, they're busy, but they often will retreat, leaving the families on its own to deal with the emotional problems in respectful retreat. And she said, I want you in. I want these nurses in on everything that we're doing. To keep dealing with the patient. Don't run away from him and deal with him or her. Second of all, very often people will say, get involved with other people that are going through these issues, the so-called support groups. talk to each other. And one very important aspect, Tim, I want to get across here, a friend reminded me today, if you hear that a loved one, I'm going back to earlier point, if you hear that a loved one may have had a stroke, rush, R-U-S-H, rush to him or her. There's a very great possibility he or she will recover. There's a possibility that steady state will remain the same. But there's also a possibility that the stroke gets worse. Don't wait for 5 or 6 or 8 days to see how it plays out. Get to that person right away and say what you have to say to that person and start working on his or her recovery. I think, again, to go back to your last question of what we do not hide the facts from people.
Be realistic.
We have to be realistic because that person is aware. Just because they have aphasia and can't speak does not mean that they do not understand you, and certainly in many cases they understand their limitations, and to say, it's going to be all right, Papa, it's going to be all right, and he's thinking, how's it going to be all right? To be there to love him, support him, and help him. It's not just an emotional, psychiatric, psychological thing. There are practical things to learn, and if you're not sure what they are, ask the doctors and the nurses and other families who've gone through this.